We're now live.
Great, thank you, Kirsty. Welcome everyone to Place. I am chairing this evening's meeting because we've got apologies from Councillor Caffrey, who would normally chair. So you might need to bear with me in terms of some of the protocols. But we have got a really packed agenda this evening. So we do need to start and we need to try and keep to time. So before I go through some of the protocols, just to say within the agenda, we've got a number of speakers, and the way it's going to work is we'll have somebody providing an input, and then immediately afterwards we'll have the normal time for questions on that specific input. But for each speaker, there's only between 10 and 15 minute time for questions. So I am going to try and keep speakers to an amount of time so we've got enough time for councillors to ask questions. So I hope that's okay. And in terms of apologies for this evening, we have got Councillor Brian Smith and Councillor Caffrey have sent their apologies, and we have got Councillor Courtney and Councillor Robinson who are subbing. So welcome to the meeting. I'd like to ask if anyone's got any pecuniary interest that they need to declare. Nope. Okay, I'll take that as a no. And the next thing we need to do is approve the minutes. Now we've got two lots of minutes. We've got one lot from July and one lot from August, but I'm assuming we need to approve them separately. Is that correct, Mike? Yeah. So can I have anybody to approve and second the minutes from July? Dave, are you? Yep, so can I have someone to second that?
I'll look at the
I'll second that.
Sorry, Paul, have you got a comment?
Yeah, I'll have a look at the minutes, and it just looks a little bit confusing on the first set because it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, nothing there, and all of a sudden 7 is when the items seem to start. Is that just some sort of type misprint, or is it just mine that's not like that?
Is it just a formatting issue, Councillor?
I think it might be. I think it might be a formatting issue. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just look at. I can look at that outside of the meeting. That's fine.
Thanks a lot, Kirsty. So apart from that, did we have? I think Councillor Dickinson raised his hand to second the July minutes. So we've got Councillor Young and Councillor Dickinson. For the August minutes, can we have someone to approve? Councillor Young again. Anyone to second? Councillor Beach. Thank you very much. So I think that's all of the immediate protocol done. Just to say what we're going to do this evening, if people want to comment, can you please write in the chat comment or question, and we will take them in the order. So I'm going to try and monitor it, but I've also got people helping, and because we haven't got a lot of time for comments and questions, we will just take in the order that they're put in, and if there are any items that we think, well, actually we need a much more in-depth discussion, we'll take that back, and I'm sure that Mike and Fazana will help us to identify a time we can come back to that specific issue. So I'm going to hand over to Mike and Andrew now.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. I just wanted to talk about the origins of this item and the process that we've suggested you follow. So we had Councillor Caffrey and Councillor Kavanagh had a very productive discussion with Zora and Andrew and Sarah Richardson, and Sarah also sends her apologies for this evening. And I think it was Andrew Pitts who first suggested that actually we ought to talk about the relationship between council services and the council and citizens. And Andrew and myself and Fazana had a couple of really useful discussions, and then worked on this programme with the chair and deputy chair. So this is a bit of a scrutiny review, if you like, during a normal meeting. So we've got several people coming to help us do that, who are going to lead discussions, and we've sent you out a timetable. So we haven't got formal presentations, we haven't got formal reports, but we have got people that we've talked to about leading discussions. We've also talked to Councillor Kavanagh beforehand about those people who are here to help us, as well as members having the opportunity to join in the discussion and add to that. So I wouldn't want anyone to see the programme from the officers or our guests that have come and suddenly think they're expected to do a big, massive presentation. They're here to lead a discussion, and that's how it will work. Fazana and myself will keep a list of bullet point sort of issues that arise, either things you need to come back to at a later date, and we'll come back to those in the conclusions. Again, we had a conversation with Councillor Kavanagh earlier on, and I think it may be that members of the board might want to have a little bit of time to think about what they've heard and what they've said tonight, and then perhaps meet informally in a few weeks' time with myself and Fazana to reach those conclusions. So it's not like your normal scrutiny board meeting when you've got 3 or 4 officer reports and you give them each 30 minutes. It's a bit of a different process. And please do use the chat if there's things about the process you want us to answer. But I'm going to be quiet now, if that's okay, Councillor Kavanagh, and pass over to Andrew, who's going to talk a little bit about, if you like, the origins of the reasons for the discussion, if that's okay, Andrew.
Okay, thanks, Mike. First of all, apologies. I've got a bit of a croaky voice at the moment, so my apologies for that. Just following on from what Mike said, I think we saw this session as being maybe about considering that we might need to move from a more traditional, almost paternalistic approach to local government, where local authorities often do things for and to people, and people often expect that to happen, to something that's more akin to a partnership where we work alongside and we do things with people. The sort of key drivers for this, probably two main issues. One is the obvious one. It's the financial aspect of it. There's obviously been a squeeze on public sector resources over recent times, and working more with individuals and communities is an opportunity to make what we've got go further, really. But equally, if not more importantly, it's about achieving better outcomes. I think there's a host of research, and there are people on the call who know more about this than me, that shows that when people are involved in planning and decision making, then they experience better outcomes, both individually and collectively. At an individual level, I think the health world tells us that people who are involved in planning and deciding their care do experience better outcomes. And collectively, I think I'd use the housing world as an example, where people are involved in designing the sort of places and communities that they live in, then you get better outcomes in terms of more sustainable communities with a better quality of life for those local residents. I think it's important tonight that we don't just see this about how we as a council can work alongside voluntary and community organisations. We had some quite long discussions at previous meetings, and we had some presentations about some of the excellent work that goes on. But this is about moving a bit beyond that. And it's about sort of recalibrating that relationship between government and citizen to provide what I would call, it's a bit of a grandiose term, but a new social contract, really, where local authorities provide a good basic level of service, but communities can work together to upgrade this to more of a sort of Rolls-Royce type situation, if you like. And I think Colin Hill may talk a little bit more about how a town council can work with a principal authority to make sure that those services are enhanced in local communities. It's also about freeing up and empowering individuals and communities to articulate their needs. At the end of the day, they know best. And I've said this time and time again, it's not me sitting on the second floor of Northgate House or in my front room or whatever who knows what's best for local communities. It's the people who actually live there. And then it's about working with them, empowering them, supporting them to take that action, not doing things for people, but making sure we as a council provide that support. And I think the discussion on community asset transfers, which Zora's going to lead, and I think the input from Kirsten and colleagues, and obviously from Debs and Richard, will no doubt elaborate on that. So finally, the other aspect that I think we touched on when we had the initial discussions to think about mapping out this session was that it's probably got something about rights and responsibilities in it as well. That individuals do have rights as taxpayers and indeed as citizens and as human beings to expect certain things to happen, but they also have responsibilities. And that can range from, keeping land and property as tidy as they can, whether it's picking up the crisp packet outside your road rather than ringing the council to say, send around a litter picker because I've got a crisp packet outside my house. About businesses, you know, increasingly thinking about, okay, when somebody opens up in the morning, let's spend 10 minutes with a brush outside on our frontage and just sweep up the cigarette ends or whatever detritus has accumulated there. And through back to maybe some of us who are that old on this call, who remember the pride that people used to take in their own doorsteps back in the sort of 60s and 70s. And Zora and I reminisced about that in a discussion we were having this morning. So it's that sort of thing, taking a bit of responsibility, but it's also about people, you know, abiding by the law and helping us by not doing things like dropping litter, allowing their dogs to foul and so on. And at the most fundamental level, it's all about how can we create a situation where individuals take the time to think about how their behaviour will impact upon others, rather than operating in a silo. We call it a silo in a service perspective, but operating just as independent agents. They're not. They're part of a society, part of a world that we in the public sector, you know, try and enhance through what we do.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andrew and Mike. I think that's really, really clear in terms of framing what today is about. So thank you for that. So I think we'll move on. So the first input we've got is from Zora, and it's looking at asset transfers. So the progress, opportunities and challenges that it gives to empower our communities. So Zora, we've got 25 minutes for this bit. So if you know, you've probably got 10 minutes to speak, and then we've got 15 minutes for input after that, if that's okay. You don't need to take the 10 minutes. I'm just saying no more than 10 minutes, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And yeah, and I apologise, some apologies from Sarah Richardson, who was going to present this part on the agenda tonight. So given that I've stepped in and Sarah's the expert, I can assure you I won't be taking 10 minutes to speak to you all. Okay, so I think just to give some context first before we actually start the discussion, you know, when we talk about community asset transfer, we're basically talking about, you know, a legal process that leads ultimately to community ownership of land and buildings. And this isn't something new. Community ownership of land and buildings, you know, goes back centuries, and we've got a long history of having that type of ownership, and particularly within Calderdale, I think. So if you look at Calderdale and, you know, and our own sort of recent experience and reflect upon that, you know, members will be aware that we invited interested groups to submit expressions of interest for some of our libraries and public halls. Well, the response was phenomenal. You know, we've seen, you know, massive amounts of enthusiasm and from, you know, passion from different local community groups who've come forward and, you know, want to create inclusive and supportive hubs within their communities. And then following a recent decision by Cabinet, we've got 7 successful expressions of interest that are now starting to go through due process. And whilst on paper, that can be very neatly summed up, I did want to emphasise that, you know, that almost belies the huge amount of work that took place behind the scenes by members, by officers, you know, by colleagues in the community and voluntary sector, and of course the groups themselves and the engagement with different parts of different parts of the community to actually get us to this point. So a huge amount of work so far. And then, you know, the next steps for those particular groups is to start to pull together some more detail about their proposal. And obviously the council will support them through that process alongside our partners in locality and the Voluntary Sector Alliance. And we're hoping to get the business cases then submitted within the next 6 months. We do know that some of those groups are much further on in that process, and we will be more than happy to receive those detailed plans earlier than that deadline if groups are able to do it. So I guess one of the questions to think about is why do it? And Andrew's already alluded to this. You know, local authorities have faced, you know, significant cuts across the last decade. Your spending on local services is down more than 21%. but that actually combines with an increasing demand. We've got cuts to non-statutory services, and we've all seen, and not just in Calderdale, but we've all seen across the country, closures and sales of buildings and spaces in neighbourhoods. So if it is about the money, couldn't we just sell them and get the capital receipt? Well, of course we could, but actually it has to be about more than that, because quite often these spaces are highly valued within the community, and they help to form that sense of place and that sense of identity. So community asset transfers as a process gives us an opportunity to breathe new life into those spaces, and not least then to allow other groups to access funding, which isn't always available to the council. And I think, again, echoing what Andrew said, that working together can actually achieve better outcomes at a local level. And those community asset transfers can create partnerships between the councils and the communities, and can help to unlock enterprise, transform local services, and also start to look at how we might want to co-design services in a locality. We know, and we've seen, how when we engage with and we empower our local community, how that in itself can help those neighbourhoods to thrive. In terms of the benefits, I mean, in essence, the community asset transfers bring together those soft assets that community groups have, such as the volunteers, the local knowledge and networks, the skills, and can marry that up with the hard assets that the council has to offer. And those assets can be anything from within the council's ownership, from buildings to bowling greens, from public toilets to parks. All very different things, but all that can actually give opportunities to rethink the way that the council and the communities can work more creatively together and work hand in hand to actually face and address some of the challenges that we're now looking at within 2021, and what that might mean in terms of a new contract between council and its citizens and its communities. So I've kept that brief, but in terms of the discussion today, Councillor, I've sort of pulled out 4 questions which really come very much out of our recent experience. We may or may not get through the 4, and I guess they might get merged into one another. But what I was thinking was a discussion around, what makes the community asset transfer successful? What are the risks, and are we brave enough to take those risks? Do community asset transfers in themselves give us an opportunity to rethink that relationship between council and citizen, and what might that look like? And then importantly for yourselves, what's the role of councillors within that? Supporters, facilitators, protagonists, antagonists, I don't know, it's how wide you want to make it, but what is your role? What do you bring to that table? Because you've got that foot in both camps, which is a really powerful position to be in. And then the other thing which came out of some of the reflections from our recent exercise was, are some communities better equipped to respond to community asset transfer opportunities, or indeed other opportunities, than other communities are? And if so, what can we then do as a council to try and redress that and make it a much more of a level playing field across all the wards of Calderdale? So they're the sorts of questions I was thinking of, Councillor. So I thought I would just open it out to start with for a general discussion around what makes a community asset transfer successful, and what might those risks be, if you're happy with that.
Yeah, that's fine. We've got 20 minutes for discussion. So yeah, let's go for it. I'm sure we've got some antagonists and protagonists in this group. Does anyone want to kick off? No one's put in the chat. Councillor Beach had a question, but I think that's for after this meeting. Are there any other people that would like to input? Yep, Councillor Courtney. Oh,
sorry, I should have put a thing in the chat. Sorry. Yeah, so I suppose about what makes a successful community asset transfer. I mean, I think obviously having detailed plans and sort of long-term plans, or short, medium, and long-term plans by the organisation that's taking it over, and also support from the council. And I think you mentioned about the different sort of communities that there are across the borough, and I think that's really relevant in terms of the sort of the amount of the people that might be living in that ward or that area where the asset is, in order what sort of skills that they have that they can do that, and how much time and energy and capacity, because obviously we know that's doing that sort of thing takes a lot of time. So I suppose it's my comment or question might be, how much support can we give as a council to groups taking on, and whose responsibilities that is? That our responsibility as community leaders within our communities? Is that or should we share this jointly? Is there's not going to be one size fits all in terms of support, but I think the amount of support that there is for those transfers is probably quite important, because of the variability of the communities that are represented across the borough.
Thanks, Councillor Courtney. Some food for thought, and I'll hand over. We've got Councillor Dickinson, Councillor Bellinger, and then Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to try and steal Paul's thunder, I'm afraid, in terms of commercialisation. I'm not entirely convinced that community asset transfers are always, in every instance, going to be the appropriate way forward. Case in point, which might be successful, for example, would be Brickhouse Civic Hall. But again, as much as anything else, I think a hard head needs to be put on shoulders to make sure that the long-term future of the building is secured in terms of its overall condition going forward. Just mindful also, for example, with North Arham Library, which of course is in Peter's ward. So that's yours as well, isn't it, George? It's about maintaining the structure and the fabric of the buildings, which I think is also important, which comes down to an effective business plan being presented by those who are seeking to apply for that community asset transfer, which I think needs to weigh heavily. So it's not just about the idea that it would be nice, but it's in terms of its effectiveness over a longer term period. In terms of, for example, Zora was talking about selling properties. I'm not generally in favour of that sort of idea. I mean, that was made clear, for example, when it came to the discussion at Clay House, when it came to Scrutiny a while back, and the suggestion was put forward by Scrutiny to look at the idea of leasing it to a commercial entity rather than just selling it, but that doesn't seem to have been pursued. I guess the point I'm trying to make really is that this is a complex area, and it does need to be approached with the right degree of caution.
Thank you, Councillor Dickinson. Can I just remind us that that it would be great if the comments could be focusing on how the relationship between our residents and the council. So I think, Councillor Dickinson, what you've said is it's really challenging and complex. But if we can think about the fact that we want to look at what the relationship is and how we can possibly transform it. So we're trying to come up with or reflect on ideas that relate to that theme. So I'll take, I think it's Councillor Bellinger next. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Regan, for raising some of those points there, to be quite honest, because you're absolutely right, and I probably would have raised some of them anyway. I think that the thoughts really is probably, again, is how you decide which buildings are going to be the ones that are going to go for an asset transfer or that we're going to dispose of, especially when we've got some buildings throughout Calderdale which are really hidden gems. And I will mention this building again. It's Clay House, a grade 2 star listed building that, if it went, there'd be a lot of members of the public that'd be sorry to see that go, because it's an iconic building, really. So it's really the case of how are the decisions made to decide on which buildings are going to go and which buildings really we're going to keep within the authority that we can actually probably do something with commercially. And it's funny because there's a signboard up outside Clay House today to say, have your weddings here at this venue. That's gone up just recently, so I don't know why. But thank you. That's it. That's my point.
Thank you. And we've got Councillor Smith.
The point about the libraries, I think that has shown that councillors have been able to work really constructively with local residents to make some really sort of positive, well, as you said, Zora, with the, you know, the 7 that are now sort of getting ready to put in business plans, and I think that's been a really quite a good process. But I think that in part is because we've seen where it came from. We've seen the journey of it going through cabinet, and this is what is happening. We've sort of agreed as a group on that that's what's happening, and we followed it through, and we've been aware of it. I think where the problem comes is when we don't, like Paul said, you know, when buildings are sort of put up for sale and we don't know where the decisions come from, or there doesn't seem to be any sort of possibility to turn some decisions round about getting community, community groups to sort of maybe look at the possibility of asset transfer. So I do think there has been some good practice, but I think communication, you know, where we're taking decisions together and councillors know what is available would help things.
Great, thank you. And Councillor Robinson. Oh, sorry, it was Councillor Clark next.
Oh, yeah.
Apologies.
That's okay, George.
After you, Councillor Clark.
Okay. Well, it's almost carrying on from what Audrey's spoken about. That how often are ward councillors involved in any community asset transfer? As Audrey was saying about the libraries, we were already involved before, you know, before it was even thought of that there would be community asset transfers, when we had the library review. The longevity of the process, and could the councillors be involved throughout that process rather than maybe just at the beginning and handing it over? I think, and I think the community maybe originally don't realise the seriousness of a community asset transfer, if you like. I think they think it's quite an easy thing to do, where it's completely the opposite. I believe it's extremely responsible. You have to be really responsible, serious, and know how to run a business. Basically, know how to set up so many different ways of working. I'm sure every community asset transfer is probably different, so I don't think there's a one-fits-all solution to anything. But I do think that ward councillors should be involved from the start right to the end, and obviously continue when the area is transferred, continue to have an interest in that transfer, in that asset.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. So, Councillor Robinson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Really quickly, I mean, one of the problems with asset transfers now is, quite frankly, there's nothing to give away in my ward anymore. But that's a separate point. I think one of the problems as well that we've got to appreciate is do asset transfers in any way restrict the council? You know, for example, Paul mentioned commercialisation. What about if the council are trying to be proactive or reactive, for example, to plug gaps in communities? You know, there's no hub in Hipperholme where we can do that. So we've just got to keep that in mind when we're going on about asset transfers. But on to constructive comments. The first thing is, can we open up asset transfers? Asset transfers don't just mean buildings. Do they also mean green spaces as well? Where, for example, the communities can develop community gardens and get involved in that space. You know, that's the first point. The second point really does come down to communication information. The only reason why we know about asset transfers is because we're councillors. But quite frankly, if I wasn't a councillor, I would have no idea how to start that process. I think all the information needs to be in one place. And that goes not just for asset transfers, but things like if you want to hold a litter pick, it needs to be on a website. On the same website, then you can also have a section on asset transfers. And then from that, how do we open it up? So if you've got an idea as a resident how do you actually suggest that to the council? And then from that suggestion, how is it actually taken seriously, and how is it followed up with that resident? And then how does the council facilitate that resident with volunteers, etc.? You know, so it's working with them, following from that suggestion. But that's my starter for 10, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. So we'll go to Councillor Young, and then I wanted to give some time for if any cabinet members, because we've got Councillor Lynn and Councillor Scullion, if you wanted to comment. Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. I've been involved with 3 asset transfers in my ward, in Calder ward. 2 of them were transferred from Calderdale Council, and 1 was a pub. Now, councillors get involved in the process from the start, because it's usually community people come to see us and ask, how do we do it? We can give them the right advice about how to go about it, and how to not do their business plan for them, but give them hints of who to contact and give them the right contacts for someone to write a business plan. But once it gets into the council pot, councillors don't have any influence at all over whether the asset transfer is successful or not, which is probably right, really, because we can, you know, sometimes have our glasses a bit twinged about things. But then at the end of the day, once they are asset transfers, it's also the job of the councillors to actually encourage them and help them out, because it's a very hard job. And say, as Steph said, every asset transfer is different, but we have the contacts of the right people who know how to do things, hopefully, and that's how we can help. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Young. So I'll bring in Councillor Lynn. And
yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Roisin. Yeah, I mean, just a couple of points really. First of all, I thought it was interesting that Zora asked about whether some communities are better equipped to respond to opportunities for community asset transfer than others. You know, if you're in an area where, you know, you've got a retired solicitor, or you've got a retired accountant, or you've got people with quite a lot of business experience and so on, then you kind of already got a little bit of a head start to start with. But I think it's really important not to forget, and it was interesting that Councillor Young, Dave was mentioning about, you know, about the fox and goose. I mean, right across Calderdale, there are like probably not just hundreds, thousands of people that are involved in running effectively small businesses, but they're not called small businesses. They're called sports clubs. They're called festivals. You know, they're called working men's clubs or whatever. So there is actually already quite a lot of experience within all our different communities of people, you know, of people having to take responsibility, faith groups and everything. They've all got to balance their books and etc. etc. So I think it's really important to start from a position of saying, look, you know, trying to build confidence and saying, look, you can do this. The second thing is I'd like to pay tribute to the VSI Alliance, and we've had, you know, the voluntary sector have been happy to support, to try and give advice and support to groups that are wanting to do community asset, get involved in the community asset transfer process. And I think that, you know, as far as I'm concerned, I've been really excited to see the way in which different groups of people have come together, particularly to respond to the possibility of the transfer of some of our libraries and museum and so on. So I just wanted to say, I think it's a really good example of what Calderdale's been very good at in the past. And we've got one of the largest worker cooperatives in the country, in Suma Whole Foods. You know, we've got quite a lot of good examples. We've got Hebden Bridge Town Hall, got quite a lot of good examples of where some of these processes have worked. We've also got examples where it's been pretty challenging and where it hasn't always worked out as it had been hoped. But so I think people are right when they said it's not something to be embarked on lightly. But I think as a council, going back to the introductory remarks that Andrew made, that this has got to be a bit less about us doing everything for folks and a bit more about us working alongside of people to try to make things happen when people have got good ideas about how to make things happen in their communities. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Councillor Lynn. Before I come back to Zora, Jane, Councillor Scullion, did you want to say anything? No. So Zora, we've got 6 minutes. there was lots of comments there, but there seemed to be an ongoing theme around communication, information, and also how do we flip it so we're not being reactive, we're being proactive, so we're actually encouraging communities to come forward to take on spaces or buildings rather than waiting until we almost need to get rid of them for various reasons. So it'd be great if you could comment on that, and then anything else that you wanted to respond to.
Thank you. I mean, I think there've been some really interesting points made there as part of that discussion, and I think that communication is something we need to get better at. I think the recent exercise with the libraries, we did involve, or we invited all ward councillors to be involved in that process and to participate in those discussions, and that was really powerful to actually see, what we could do when we came together to actually have some of those conversations. But you're absolutely right, and it is about being more proactive rather than reactive. And for me, that goes to where we started about that. What is the council's relationship with its citizens? What are we going to guarantee that we're going to do as part of the local authority delivering service to you? What are you as a citizen going to agree to do as your role as a citizen and in response to our part of that contractual relationship, if you like? And it's how we come together then. And there isn't going to be one size fits all. We live in a really diverse and varied borough with equally diverse and varied communities within that. And we need to understand, I think, and work at a local level with our ward councillors, who are that, those ears and eyes on the ground alongside our community and voluntary groups, to understand what the opportunities are and what the risks are in each of our individual areas, and whether that's just how we get together to do what Councillor Robinson suggested to do. If it's a litter pick where we're bringing people together, we make that easy and not bureaucratic, that would be a win, I think, to start with. Or whether or not it's something much bigger, like taking over a building and really enabling that building to turn into a valuable community asset that everybody can enjoy, and that actually then helps that neighbourhood to thrive. So it goes across that whole spectrum. But equally, I'm minded within that, and Councillor Courtney made the point that there are some communities where there perhaps isn't the capacity and the skill set within those communities to actually energise and make that happen, or it might happen in a different way. And again, we need to recognise how we might better engage with different communities who perhaps will approach it in a different way, will have a different skill set altogether, and how we can actually make the most of that instead. So, we're not going to have solicitors sitting there in every community waiting to start drawing up legal documents or constitutions for new groups, but we've got lots of other skills that our neighbourhood officers can work with, and people we work with, and we'll come to this a bit later on in the agenda, to actually help those communities thrive and to actually just sort of harness some of that energy that's there. And Councillor Lynn made the point, absolutely right, let's not pretend this isn't happening already, because there are examples from every kids' football club to a community pub to whatever, of where this is happening now, and it's really successful. What we need to do is to learn from those successful formulas and turn that into a strong partnership contract, working alongside the council to make sure that we can deliver our services to those that are most in need.
Great, thank you, Zora. I think that's a bit of a call to arms for all the members on the call. No, appreciated. So thank you everyone for that input. We're going to move on to the next bit of the meeting. So we have got Colin Hill, who is an experienced town clerk. And Colin, what you're going to be talking about is the relationship between councils such as Calderdale Council, that might be called the primary council, and councils such as town councils and parish councils, and what that relationship looks like, but also how it can work together to change the relationship with residents and what's done there. So Colin, we've got 20 minutes in total. So I'll give you some time, then I'm going to hand it over to members again to comment, if that's all right.
Okay, thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. When Andrew said and Mike said it, I didn't realise I might be leading on something, but there you go. So just very quickly, by way of an introduction, because I am aware you all know each other's, but in my past history, I was the head of a service at the Borough Council, so I do understand some of the pressures of the financial constraints and also the challenges of getting into communities. But I've also been a town clerk of a high growth town council that has had an ambitious service delivery to take over services from a borough council, including a town hall, and that's reinforcing some of the issues that you talked about, keeping buildings open as key parts of the infrastructure of town centres, etc. But also a parks, where we've also involved a lot of community involvement and working through management agreements with bowls clubs to try and enable them to try and help us, plus also deliver lots of schemes for youngsters. So in terms of that, that's one experience, and then a current experience, which is working for a town council that is much smaller, but has more of an enabling and facilitating role, okay, but also has very much direct contact with residents, particularly through representation as trustees or as members of voluntary groups, and an active grant support process. So hopefully, I approach this from not any of those roles, but as an individual with perhaps a little bit of experience that might be able to throw something in from the lower authority end, but I obviously appreciate the differences there. So I want to talk about one or two things, and they sort of align with what Andrew said and some of the other parts of the conversations, but maybe just turn it in from the town council and potentially the community point of view. And I think the first thing to ask and pose the question is, are town councils closer to their community than you as councillors might be? And therefore, is there a need to make sure in this process that they are far more actively involved and engaged in what you're trying to seek through? I think it's also important, if you are going to engage with town councils, that you understand that it's not a one size fits all. Town councils have very different remits amongst themselves, different budget issues, different officer capabilities and responsibilities, and different member experiences as well. So I think if you are looking to try and develop something, then my suggestion might be just be aware that they are a bit different. Now, I think also as part of that identification, it's about trying to determine whether local ties already exist. So again, some town councils may be close and have those ties and not. And if they've got those ties, then does that provide a quicker bridge in terms of a foundation to try and get into that? Also, in terms of if there is a strong community involvement, are there a number of cross-cutting issues that can be joined together in terms of a lot of the ways that you deal with stuff that might also meet and deal with some of the aspirations that you're wanting to put forward? In terms of working together with principal authorities, I think communication and conversation is the key thing. It's difficult with some town councils because historically there might be a bit of a friction relationship, okay, with the parent authority and not, depending what's happened in the history. But my experience is as always, speak to people and try and establish the relationships, and that's what I've done hopefully very well with Andrew, that has led, together with working with other Calderdale employees and officers, in terms of actually a major delivery for Todmorden of the Wheels Park recently, and that would not have happened without collaborative working amongst us all and understanding that building of those relationships is very clear. That involves an investment of time, but also in terms of taking forward any relationship of any nature, there is inevitably going to be the need for a financial involvement of some way in terms of trying to pump, prime and enable, if you are potentially going to be looking at some stage for a town council to maybe act as a conduit for trying to deliver some of these things. Now, in terms of one or two other things that we talked about on the agenda about taking on parks and state grounds management, my views on that are very much what's the appetite of the community. And it was alluded to earlier in terms of what might be availability and skills, but has that community got the skills to be able to take on these things? As indeed, have the groups got the capacity? Okay, and I think that's another important thing to understand. And probably more importantly, from your point of view, when you think about the asset transfer thing, actually, will the group have longevity? And that is a real difficult one to try and get to the grips with, because we may take forward and work with management agreements to put in place ways of operating stuff, but actually it's only as good as long as the people of the volunteering are prepared to be there, and that's always got to be an issue. So in terms of direct delivery with groups, my experience has been best about getting their involvement, ownership, buy-in, but also having clear obligations and responsibilities, normally through some type of management agreement, so that, you know, when you do get some disagreements, you've actually got something that you've collectively agreed on in the first place to form your base for trying to get some mediation through it. But I say ownership and buying and involvement, to me, are actually key. If I can just comment, if I may, also on asset transfers, and I didn't comment during the thing because I felt I'd come from a different way. It's a big ask to ask local groups to be, to take on the responsibility of that. So I pose the question, is there a role for a town council to act as the intermediary and accountable body, right, in terms of trying to do so? Understanding that the knowledge of officers at that level is not as great as potentially what it might be in terms of the specific disciplines that are necessary with regards to that transfer, therefore the need and for the principal authority to really invest some time in the town council to improve their knowledge and their skills and their understanding to do it. And as I said, that and capacity building in terms of trying to make things might happen may involve some financial contribution or phasing of financial contribution to enable either groups or the town council to bridge the financial gap over a period of time. The final bit is I think something that I identified when I joined my current council a couple of years ago, the enormous amount of community work going on, right, and the tremendous appetite for trying to do stuff. But when I look at this and I get snippets every now and again of different stuff that comes through on grants, there are a number of similar themes, but I'm not sure they're necessarily joined together. And I think there is an opportunity, bearing in mind funding constraints, to try and put in place some structure which could be support from the borough council as well, as how to actively look at bringing groups together to bid for larger pots that out of the output of it deliver some of those individual aims and objectives that the groups are trying to do. But again, that needs some resource and capacity building and to some degree specialism about how you try and apply for some of these things. So I think there are some tremendous opportunities for town councils to become involved. Whether they would wish to or not, I think very much also depends upon how the approach is made from the principal authority as to how engaged and involved them, and an understanding that they are not the same, but they could collectively work very well together. But I'm not sure if that helps or not.
That's great. Thank you, Colin. So we had appetite of community, capacity, longevity, ownership, buy-in, intermediary, investing time and capacity building. I think you gave a great summary of all of the things needed and a more joined up approach to grant giving. So councillors, we've got 10 minutes. Have you got any input at this point? Please put it in the chat. Councillor Courtney?
Yeah, I'm just aware that there are 2 current members and 1 ex-member of Hebden Roy Town Council on this call, and I know that it's very interesting, Colin, when you were sort of talking about some of the things that the town councils can do, because on our town council in Hebden Royd, which covers Hebden Bridge and Mytham Royd, there's been quite a lot of stuff. So if we've got asset transfer, I mean, this happened before my time on the council, but asset transfer of the cinema into the town council, of the town hall into a community association rather than the town council, but also we are also doing things like employing workers for our area to help with things like citizens advice, and rather than employing them, we're sort of commissioning, we're doing some micro commissioning, I suppose, for sort of to have for an employment, a worker from C&K Careers to come in to work with young people, and also someone from Citizens Advice Bureau funding some time from one of them to come in and do some sessions with people locally. And that's been, I think sort of working really well. So I think, there is a way of doing stuff. Now we're a relatively large town council, I think, and comparatively, and we don't have the cap on the amount that we can put the precept up by that local authorities have in the same way. So I think that, and we also have quite a big grant giving process, a grant giving capacity as well, which is, I think, really been a really positive thing. So it is very much possible. And then also that thing about bringing groups together in order to be able to bid for bigger pots of funding. I feel in Hebden Bridge and Mythenroyd, we've got a town board which feels quite well supported by the, and they don't have to be town boards, they could be area boards, but it's quite well supported by the local authority, as well as involvement from the town council and other stakeholders, hopefully lots of other stakeholders. I think we've sort of pretty much got it covered, but other stakeholders in the in our communities and we're trying to, at the moment, sort of put together a some projects so that if funding becomes available, sorry, I'm gonna have to.
I think your dog had further to say, Councillor Courtney. I'll move on we've got Councillor Smith, Bellinger, Young and Robinson. We've only got till 7 o'clock, so we'll see how far we get. Some of you, depending on the other comments, might not get to speak, but we'll try. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I think the idea of getting groups together is a really important one to look at funding, and we did sort of mention that in the Green Space Review, and we looked at maybe the volunteer coordinator or that volunteer sort of role that's funded through Active Calderdale to take on a more strategic approach at pulling groups together to look at how they could put in funding bids, because the Friends of group would have a lot more power to work collaboratively outside of sort of the restraints of the town boards. Well, that was my thinking.
Great, thank you. Councillor Bellinger.
Thank you, Chair. Parish councils can actually make a huge difference to the areas in which they're in. However, each parish council is different depending on the demographic of the area from which they're in, because some have larger areas than others, some have retail, whereas others just have mainly residential. And that all sort of like then comes back to the precept on which those parish councils receive every year, and the precept then determines on what they're actually allowed to do throughout the year. Some get a lot, some don't get so much. My concern sometimes is you get a lot of people say, well, I'm paying my council tax, I expect this from Calderdale Council, and now I'm paying a precept to a parish council, I'm paying double. So I think we've got to ensure at the end of the day that we don't end up coming across as double taxation, where we start asking parish councils to do certain things that we as an authority need to maintain and continue with as well. So we've always got to make sure, I think, at the end of the day, that whatever parish councils do or other community groups do are different or on top, extra to what Calderdale Council, that what we do as an authority, and we've got to make sure that that's right at the end of the day. Otherwise, we're going to end up with quite a number of people rather upset that they're paying twice for something that should be done once or paid for once.
Thank you. Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. Sarah covered much of what I was going to say, but I just want to point out one particular asset transfer was a picture house. Calderdale Council owned the picture house. They couldn't afford the digitisation, which was required about 7 or 8 years ago, and it cost £50,000. So we, on the town council, because I've been a town council for 18 years, and we did the process of going through the asset transfer. It took about 12 months, but we just raised the precept in Hebden Royd to pay for the digitisation of the picture house, and there's been a roaring success, and we've actually made quite a bit of money out of the picture house, which all the money is refinanced and goes back into refurbishment, because one of the biggest things on any asset transfer is refurbishment of the buildings. But I think our town council, with my other hat on, has worked with Calderdale ever since I've been on the town council, and we've achieved a lot. Skate Park in Hebden was another asset that we created with the community group and the town council and Calderdale Council. And we've always worked closely with Calderdale, and that's the only way you can improve things at the moment. And I think it's a good way. The town council should be proactive and not just a knocking shop for the primary council, which some are, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Some really practical examples there of when it's working really well. So I'll go to Councillor Robinson, and then before we go back to Colin, if there's anybody else who wants to say anything, please let me know in the chat. Councillor Robinson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a quick comment from me in terms that town council is very much worked by taxation, the unlimited preset, which in itself can be a bit marmite, may I add. But obviously, because it's a taxation model, essentially the town council can provide services. It's a doer. Whereas this discussion, Calderdale Council are trying to put the onus on residents to be doers rather than a paid service, rather than the town council. So the point I think we just need to be mindful in this discussion is at what point does promoting a town council model in some ways undermine our mission of getting residents to take ownership and residents to do things rather than councils doing things. I think we just need to be really mindful, because the messaging could become a bit conflated.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. So I'll hand, no one else has indicated, so I'll hand back to you, Colin, just if you want to reflect on anything that's been said. But just to say before you do that, I think some of the points you made that were around the role of the council in terms of investment and what I will call financial bridging. So a period of time in which the council supports services, or the town council within a temporary amount of time. I think we haven't really spoken about, but maybe we can take that away in terms of conversations around asset transfers. But I'll hand back over to you, Colin.
Thank you, Chair. Just maybe a couple of things about the residents, wanting to be doers. Absolutely, totally agree with that. And I think, but the question is, can you make the bridge with the town council to involve the town councils more to help you deliver what you want to deliver? And I totally get that. I just think there is an opportunity, and I'm aware, yes, like Hebden Bridge, they make me be a bit farther forward on some of these things, but that's not the same with all town councils. In terms of issues about taxation and preset raise, yeah, it can be sensitive, but if I maybe give you an example. So at the first town council I worked to, we took precept up from 100,000 to 750,000 over a 4-year period. That was some rise, but we did it all with consultation and open meetings with the public about what we were wanting to do. In that instance, the borough council, it was a bit clearer, because the borough council was either saying we will stop doing this, or we will reduce the level of service that we provide in doing this. So it was to some extent a bit more of a Hobson's choice for people, but they actually accepted it, but were very critical to hold to account the town council actually then the delivery of the service they felt then would be better. And that's please not criticising anything of the service that Calderdale did deliver, but the practical reality as to how residents looked at that.
Thank you, Colin. That was great. Andrew, I know you've requested to just talk about double taxation. You've got a minute, so go for it.
I won't take a minute, Chair. Yeah, I referred to in the introduction this issue of basic level of service versus Rolls Royce, and I think this is the key here. 2 examples. We're working with a parish council at the moment to consider whether higher specification railings can be installed in their parish area, which cost 3 times as much as the standard ones we use as the highway authority. They want that extra quality, if you like, so we're working with them and they'll pay for it. Similarly, we're also looking at whether they can have some roads gritted which don't meet our Calderdale Council criteria for gritting. You know, so if they want to do that, they will pay for that. So the key really in terms of communicating this to residents is it's not about double taxation, it's about the added value that people are getting something extra in that area for their precept that they would not get if they lived in a non-precepted area. So I know it's often a difficult argument, but I think we try and keep it pretty simple like that about added value. It's a lot easier to get that over to people.
Thank you, Andrew. I think it's also an argument for town councils, actually, in terms of what they bring. Thank you, everyone, for that input. So we're going to move swiftly on to looking at learning from public health, which is obviously really pertinent in terms of what we've all been through over the last year and a half. So we've got Debs Harkins and Richard Croker looking at how communities have been empowered to take action to improve health. And we've got 20 minutes in total. Sorry, this is all a bit of a rush. We've got so many speakers. So if you could keep your inputs to 10 minutes, and then we've got a bit more time for discussion, because I think there'll be lots of things to say on this. Over to you, Debs.
Brilliant. Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. So I think Richard's got a presentation. Have you, Richard?
Yeah, do you want me to share it now, Debs?
Well, I guess we don't have to. I think it's not really been a presentation sort of meeting, has it? So perhaps I'll just talk really briefly through. So what we're going to do is just talk a little bit about community-centred public health really briefly. Then Richard's going to give an example from of Active Calderdale, and I'm going to give an example of a case study from the COVID pandemic as well. So just to start, the influences on health that we increasingly look at the root causes of health, and obviously money, having a job, having a home, and being safe and secure are the fundamental determinants of health. But over and above that, what's increasingly evident is the importance of sort of community factors in enabling people to be healthy. So having good relationships and connections with others, being socially and physically active, being in control of our lives, having a sense of purpose, contributing to the things that matter to us, learning new things and loving where we live are now all known to lead to a number of benefits, including feeling happy, being well, having the support we need, being resilient to adversity, taking pride in our local area, reaching our potential and being independent. And they're all really, really important sort of elements, I guess, of health. And for many of us, our jobs will give us those things. But for some people, it's the things that the opportunities they have to get involved in their community that really bring those benefits that I've just described. So, we've been working community-centred public health, a thing that's been going on. I've been in public health for 31 years, and this is the way I came into public health. This has been something that's very, very long-standing. We've been working on for a really long time, and we've learned quite a lot from that. And I'll just highlight just a couple of things. One thing that we've really learned is that when we're working on our priorities, it's really important that we explicitly consider three things: what the council can do to achieve that priority, what the council and communities can do together, and what communities can do for themselves and each other to achieve that priority. And what we tend to do is quite explicitly consider those three levels. And there's some sort of things, I guess, that we've learned about what it means about how we work as councils. So it means that we design services with communities, we have honest and open conversations with the public about the constraints, about the limitations and the constraints that there are, that we know our community's strengths as well as the needs. We come very much from a strengths-based approach, that we recognise as a council that there are times that the community can lead. Sometimes that can be a challenge for us as professionals to actually recognise that actually communities are best placed sometimes to learn on issues. Enable communities to make things happen and think about how we do that. And really importantly, to underpin all of this, is investing in the voluntary and community sector who can really sort of help to enable this to happen. And I'm going to hand over to Richard, who's going to give a really brief example from Active Calderdale, and then I'll do the COVID example.
Thanks, Debs. Yeah, if it's okay, I am going to share my screen because I've got a few slides that I think it'll probably be more beneficial if I share the slides, and I'll keep it brief. It's only be 4 or 5 slides, and it'll be hopefully very quickly sharing. Or I'm back on Zoom, which is a bit new to me. I'm used to Teams now, but hopefully you're all able to see the screen. And I just want to quickly cover Active Calderdale from the perspective of a strategy that's looking how do we change behaviour, and very much at the centre of this is the importance of how we engage with communities and what I would describe as being led by communities on this, and them leading the way. So for us, it is about how we make physical activity embedded as part of day-to-day life in Calderdale. For us, and I'll quickly talk about the vision, is everyone has the opportunity, capability and motivation to move more and be active, which we know is a known behaviour change programme. But the importance within that, the mission for us is how do we work with communities to make physical activity an embedded part of day-to-day life? What does it mean to the communities that we're working with? And how can they influence some of the things that we know need to exist in communities for people to both want to move more and also feel like they're able to and capable of moving more? In terms of the approach that we're taking, it's quite a fancy slide, but essentially what we're saying here from a physical activity and moving more perspective, we need to surround people with lots of different interventions and support to move more. And these are the things that we think need to exist in communities to help them to move more, from more social encouragement, because we know that we are social beings, and we're heavily influenced by the people that we connect with, and particularly the people that we trust, whether that's the health and social care system from a GP or the voluntary and community sector, our workplaces. But also importantly, we know that a big factor in terms of whether we're more active and we move more is the physical environment conditions we exist within, and the provision that's available to us, from the built environment, the infrastructure to enable us to walk and cycle, the sport and leisure provision around us, the parks and green spaces. And from an Active Calderdale perspective, what we're trying to do is ensure that the community are involved in the design and development of these conditions, and so that we don't impose what we think are attractive parks and green spaces. How can we take the approach that we're led by communities on that, and we let them tell us what they perceive as attractive? And it's actually a known cognitive bias, and it's called the IKEA effect, that if you're involved in the design and development of something, you disproportionately feel that it's better. Whether it is or not is irrelevant. Because I've been involved in the process, I have a vested interest in it. And I think that's a really important point for us to note in this discussion, is that communities need to be lead this work in order to take ownership of it and feel like it's theirs. So in terms of the work that we're trying to do, we're trying to create these conditions in communities based on what communities want, and that giving them the motivation, capability and opportunity to move more. Hopefully that leads to people moving more, whether it's cycling, whether it's going to the gym, taking part in sport, dance, gardening, whatever it may be, however they choose. Ultimately about them being healthier and happier. And just to pick up from a principles perspective, and I think the one to pick out is the co-design. The work that we're doing has to be co-designed with the communities that we're seeking to create better conditions for those reasons that I've just explained. So hopefully that brings to life a bit about, from a strategy perspective, of how we're changing and trying to modify behaviour based on what the community wants. And actually, I'll hand back over to you now, if that's okay.
Could keep the final slide on, because I'm conscious we're running out of time, so I want to show it at least. So just to give you those, if you remember, I mentioned those 3 categories. What we do as the council, what we in the council, we do as a council with our communities, and what communities do for themselves. And I just want to really highlight the COVID response. And every time I've done this, and I have been at this a long time, that middle column is always the one with the most stuff on. That whatever the priority is, whatever it is we're trying to do, we end up doing more together with communities than either communities do on their own or that we do on our own as an organisation. So absolutely, as the council, we have to enforce the law in relation to COVID. We have to manage outbreaks, the technical stuff. And actually our community stepped up within days of the pandemic and set up mutual aid groups, delivered support to people impacted by COVID. And we have an amazing, more than I think a couple of hundred community COVID champions out there engaging with communities doing it. And we do very little as a council in that. We help them be informed, but that's all. And then in terms of the middle, I won't go through all of these, but the middle, the green column, we just do so much. In fact, the most successful things we've done in our response to COVID has been working together with communities. So I'm just going to give the extra testing that we did in June and July as an example. We worked with town and parish councils, we worked with local communities. We worked with Calderdale councillors to deliver the extra testing programme that we did at that period of time. But there's lots and lots of examples where we've worked hand in hand with communities. I'm going to stop there, Councillor Cavanagh. So there's time. I think we did have some questions that we thought it might be worth asking as well, just to stimulate the discussion. So what needs to happen for us to work more closely with communities, and what can we do to enable communities to do more for themselves? And really, what's the role of councillors in this? How can councillors support this?
And I'll stop sharing there if that's okay.
Great, thank you. It's really brilliant to hear such more solid examples of how we've worked brilliantly with the community in terms of that fruitful partnership. So I can't see any indication in the chat yet. So councillors, can you indicate? Councillor Dickinson, go for it.
Thank you, Chair. Just reflecting on Andrew Pitts' comments about the basic level and Rolls-Royce level of service that could be put forward, but with the relationship between town councils and the precept and what have you. And there's something to be said for that. I mean, what it smacks of is to go into dangerous territory, rolling back the state a little bit. But I think for the council taxpayer, what needs to happen, and it's in answer to the first of those three questions put forward at the end of that presentation, what needs to happen, I think, would be some kind of charter that would outline what that basic level of service is that you can expect for the money that you pay for your council tax, so that if you want to encourage that wider civic engagement, and then, yeah, this is the basic level. If you want more than that, you're going to have a degree of self-organisation through one form or another. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Bellinger.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points, really. I think when it comes to involving the community, and something we've learned recently ourselves in this ward through Amy, who works with a volunteering group, and it's a case of, we tend to find that if it's an authority-led scheme, that a lot of people tend to back away a little bit because they feel as though they're going to get told what to do and how they're going to do things. Whereas if we find that if it's the community that come to us with their ideas of what they want to do, and then we sort of like empower them, support them as an authority, then it tends to work better because it brings more people together. And I'm a huge fan of bringing the communities together to work on projects within their areas, because they take ownership of it and they get what they want in their area. So I think it's how we ask people. I think that's sort of like a bit of a priority, really, that we need to look at how we get that. I did have another point. I mean, it's gone out of my head. When it comes back, I will put another comment in.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Robinson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. May I also congratulate Richard on the Active Calderdale website. I think it's a good example as well. One aspect that I want to bring into this is Active Calderdale and the gym provision. It's actually unique in that it is actually a commercial service as well. So it is actually an income generation opportunity. And one feeling that I have is, in some ways, if you focus on the commercial element, then you're actually improving your offering and therefore by improving your offering, people are getting fitter. It's a win-win scenario for everyone here. So I just want to bring in that commercial element there. So for example, on about like refer friends schemes, I want about discounted memberships. The other thing I would like to just touch on is the Better Living programme, and it boils down to that age-old thing of communication. The council have been doing this Better Living programme for ages, where people can lose weight, they get a 10-week programme, they get free memberships, but literally I never hear it anywhere. I really don't. We do in some ways think probably a theme coming from this discussion, we need to plug that communication gap. I'm not sure, I don't have the golden bullet there, but I think we need to try and focus on that.
Thank you. I'm glad there's no golden bullets, Councillor Robinson. Councillor Courtney.
Yeah, just briefly on the Better Living. I mean, I use the Better Living programme, and that's what helped me lose 7 stone over a sort of a period of years. And that was actually through a GP referral. So there is referral on that basis, and there are sort of membership details of that up in well, there were in sort of swimming pools and stuff. But I suppose that's like if you're already going to a swimming pool, or if you're already going to a leisure centre, you know, it'd be, yeah, that's an interesting point. But it is, I can highly commend that programme. It's very positive, the programme that certainly. And I also agree with Paul about engaging communities, and it's really, really important. Look at this, all this cross-party agreement, isn't that fantastic? That's a wonderful thing. But one of the things that I feel very strongly about is around the positive thing around a physical environment, and the physical environment is so important to people's health and well-being, whether it's their both mental health and physical health. And I think that we need with working with communities, but we need to really be looking at investment in place and space one way and another, and whether that's encouraging communities to take pride in their space and place. But I do think that in some of our poorest communities, and I know at the end of the in the sort of the thing that was sent round about, you know, what strategies can we encourage can the council adopt to encourage people to modify their behaviour, and if we've got any things that we can take forward. But one of the things that in some of our poorest communities, you know, have people got the emotional and mental space to be able to look at this and to be able to really work with this now? And I know that it can be a very positive spiral, an upward spiral, that actually if people are encouraged to take action locally, it can actually make them feel better. But if people have got insecurity around their housing, and if people have got insecurity around their income one way or another, then actually breaking that sort of downward sort of spiral that can cause, because if you've got insecurity within your housing and insecurity within your income, it has a massive impact on mental health. I mean, I know that we've had discussions in CYP and with with adult scrutiny panel about sort of suicide prevention and that sort of thing, and that, you know, that those sorts of factors on people's lives have such a massive toll on people's mental health. That how can we help sort of overcome some of that? Because I do think that you can reverse that, but how do we sort of get over that hump, really? Because I think, you know, if people are taking pride in, if people can have the sort of mental space and do have the sort of space to be able to sort of look at that, then actually it can become a very positive sort of a positive feedback rather than negative feedback. But, you know, I think we've really got, you know, to look at the fact that not everybody has the sort of mental space. It's not about capacity, it's about space. Because if your life is so filled with where am I sleeping, or, you know, is my tenancy coming to an end, or, you know, where's my next meal coming from, how can people then, you know, spend time at looking at what they can do? So I think you know, we need to help that process. We need to have support from the council, needs to support people, as well as sort of being able to invest in sort of place and space. So it's like, I suppose, how do we best do that? You know, I'm not coming up with an answer. I'm posing a question. Sorry.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Bellinger, Councillor Clark, I'm really sorry we don't have time to take your input, so I'm going to go back to Debs, just because I know you wanted to input and just to reflect on any comments.
That's been a really, really helpful discussion. Thank you for that. And I think just listening to what you've been saying, I think it's absolutely right about the challenges of, I said it straight away, the first thing I said, wasn't it, about those sort of material living conditions being really important. But, you know, one of the reasons that community-centred public health is so important, and where it came from, is what we were seeing two communities equally deprived, equally challenged, and one had better health, lots of these in places, and one had better health than the other. And the reason that people's physical and mental health was better was because it was a vibrant, connected community. And particularly in relation to behaviour change, I think what's really, really important is absolutely there's things that we need to do as a council to help people change behaviour, but be absolutely assured that behaviour is more like that changed behaviour is more likely to be sustained if people are connected to supporting their community, feel part of the community, have that sense of purpose. It really helps them keep the healthy and maintain the healthy behaviours, even when they're living in deprived communities. So that's probably all I want to say, Chair, if that's okay.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for the discussion. I am going to move us on. So we are moving on to thinking about neighbourhoods and the voluntary community sector. So we've got, in this bit, we've got Kirsten Fussing, who's going to talk about neighbourhoods. And then we've got Catherine, sorry, you just jumped to my screen and I lost your surname. Catherine Sullivan and Hilary Turley, who are just going to talk about work in the voluntary and community sector. But we'll start with Kirsten.
Hiya, thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. So what I'm going to talk to you about is what's already happening in terms of council delivering, engaging directly with people to listen to them, which is through our neighbourhood teams. So there are some structured ways they do that are timetabled. Some of you will be very aware of them, like the ward forums, and then there's very much responsive ad hoc listening and taking views activities that happen. So most of the teams will do some element of door knocking with ward councillors and with other key partners to go out to places where either there's a particular issue that they know they want to listen to people's views about, or it's an area where there's a lot of complex issues and difficulties where they want to listen to people, which will inform prioritisation of what responses we do as a service, as a council. There are lots of other opportunities to just listen to people in terms of a more generic, what's the general mood coming out of people, what are the things that are really making a negative impact on people's lives. So that's through the Calderdale conversations, for example. And then it's opportunistic. So we have a drop-in at Halifax Central Initiative where people come with needs, but their needs might be one or two things, but actually there's usually a load of stuff to unpack around that. So we can listen to that and understand what the challenges are. And then there are a range of local forums which our neighbourhood teams take part in. So the Ellen District Partnership or the Neighbourhood Forum and Park and existing community partnerships that the neighbourhood teams attend and listen to as a partner, co-producing in that way that Debs was talking about, working with different organisations to make a difference in communities. So for the other thing that they'll do is like reactive work. So when there's a flood or when there's a pandemic, the neighbourhood coordinators, the neighbourhood teams are that link between what we need to know and what's happening to people. So we'll be facilitating that information flow in both directions. So the COVID partnerships for, in areas of high infection have been really, really effective and have been kind of organised by the neighbourhood teams. But again, it's a partnership. It's not a delivery just by us. And there'll be other ways that the neighbourhood teams are listening to what's going on. And I have to talk about the poisonous world potentially of social media because we can't ignore it. It's there and it's important. And people say things on there that they perhaps wouldn't say in other ways. So the neighbourhood teams take a very considered approach to listen to what's going on social media. We don't respond directly. We have a comms team to do that. But if there's issues coming up that we're sensing or worrying, then they'll go and talk to other people as well, like ward councillors, get a feel for how much is that what's being talked on social media actually genuinely affecting people's lives. And then finally, our neighbourhood teams are involved in a number of different problem-solving partnerships, we call them. So there'll be like the Safer, Cleaner, Greener group, who might be dealing with issues around environmental blight, antisocial behaviour, community safety. And then we've got specific target groups, which are like a subject group, so the Road Safety Partnership. And the neighbourhood teams will be listening to people out on the streets, the wardens will be talking to people, the neighbourhood officers will talk to people, feedback concerns and issues to those problem-solving partnerships that will be addressed together. And as ward councillors, many of you are probably on some of those partnerships and you inform those decision makings as well. So I think, just to sum up quickly, because I know the other guys need to have a little talk, is that the neighbourhood team activity is very much about listening and information flow to forwards and backwards. It's less about empowering the communities to make decisions about the things that affect them. So for your consideration is for me about how much genuine deliberation and decision making do we give our public to make beyond their vote during, you know, a traditional democratic process. So I just wanted to raise that as something you might want to consider thinking about.
I think that's a great question to end on, Kirsten, a big question. So I'll hand over to Catherine Sullivan, who I think you're the new Chief Exec of Voluntary and Community. That's right, I've not met you yet. Yeah, so welcome. So obviously you and Hilary weren't invited to do formal presentations, but to obviously respond in the sense of the voluntary and community sector and what you're doing to enable communities to be involved and take control or be empowered. Over to you, Catherine.
Lovely. Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh, and thank you very much for inviting me here today. I'm a month in, so it's very, very new to me, and officially it's only actually 8 days into full-time contract, so it is very new. So I don't want to spend too much time talking, because I think that some of the discussions have been really good so far, but I wanted to reflect on a couple of things. I've worked in the voluntary and charity sector for pretty much all my career, and it's been mentioned a few times by a number of speakers so far, and that's about connection. And it's the feeling of connection to a place, to a person, to a group of people. And we know that people in Calderdale care, and we know that they've got connections, because there are so many organisations that exist already that do amazing things, and some of them have already been mentioned today, so I'm not going to go into all of that. But there are a couple of things that I wanted to pick up on, not necessarily directly related to what I was going to talk about originally, but around the idea of collaborative bids for funding and what have you. And there is, I don't know how many people are aware of Calypso and the fact that that has been set up as it is a charity, and it's got VACRA, a founding partner in that, to facilitate joint procurement bids by community and charitable organisations in Calderdale. And one of the reasons for that is something that I think is really important about why, as Richard said, sort of co-design things, people take ownership of that inherent connection to that place because they've been part of it, but also because they're able to have agency in the outcome. So there's loads of things from Deb's slide at the end about the things that were achieved by the council and COVID response and the things that were achieved by communities alone. The fact that the middle slide section was so much greater than the sum of those two parts is because community groups on their own don't have access to things and to decision making, to power and to money. And one of the challenges around Calypso and the sort of pilot programs that we've got with Calypso is that the community groups themselves don't necessarily have the capacity to report in the way that funders require them to report. So the voluntary sector needs to be there as part of that, or another agency needs to be there as part of that to enable that, to bridge that gap between the individuals and the groups who collectively already want to do incredible things, but they just haven't got the agency to be able to get there. And I think that's really, really important to think about. And basically to say, you know, the voluntary sector it's there, we're here to be utilised, and we're the conduit. We've got some of the things that Debs has talked about, engagement champions, you know, we have communication links that are different from the councils, and they can be harnessed and utilised, you know, if we know what's wanted. And I think my last thing is going back to the assumptions piece, is not assuming the reasons why people don't do a particular action that you would expect that you would do. There are so many unknowns. We've touched on mental health, we've touched on, you know, anxiety around a place to live or anything else, but you don't know the combination of those factors, that an individual person hasn't got the space to be able to pick up that crisp packet at the end of their drive, or whatever it is that's going on that makes it feel like it's different. So only by having those conversations can we really understand that, and we need to have them in multiple places. There's only so much the voluntary sector can do as well, but we will absolutely want to play our part in that, and we're happy to work with you as often as we can. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Catherine. And over to you, Hilary.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. So I work for All One Collective and Lab, and we've been working with communities across Calderdale since 2018 on the Active Citizens programme. So this is a British Council funded programme, and it's basically a social action leadership programme. So we work with groups of people, they're often very diverse in terms of like their social backgrounds.
Hilary, sorry, you're a little bit quiet. You might need to sit closer.
Okay, is that better?
A bit better.
Okay, let me see if I can just... Is that a bit better?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Yeah, so people come on the programme, sometimes they're just interested in volunteering, sometimes they've got an idea for a project, other times they're already quite active and already have a kind of active community group. So they all start from different places, but what happens on the programme is that we take them through a journey, which is really about them connecting with each other, building their confidence and building their skills so that they can sustain their action, and also sort of start working collectively and working together. So what we do is we run very kind of participatory workshops, which start off with looking at the individuals in the group and exploring things around identity and culture. So understanding and thinking about how these are expressed in different ways, but valuing different perspectives, and lots of stuff around how we can sort of hold our assumptions lightly when we're connecting with and encountering people who are different from the people from themselves. We then move on to look at things around dialogue. So that's around intercultural dialogue and also just more around active listening skills, because we know that when people are running projects or have ideas that they need to build connections with people, and they need to sort of listen and understand what's going on for people in the local community. We then look at things around the local and global communities. So it's really about connecting people's local experiences and their everyday realities to what's happening on a global level as well. And we then look at things around like how we influence people, who has power, and how we can use our power, both like collectively, but also that kind of individual power that people develop, the empowerment that happens when people go through this programme. And then finally, we look at things around sort of planning and delivering social action. So it's really only at the end that we really look at how we can run a project effectively, things around monitoring and evaluation, and how we can tell people about the success of the project and how we can learn from them. So we think it's really, really important, this whole process, where people really get to explore themselves, their identities, what it means to live in a community, and to really connect with each other. And I think that groundwork is really essential for sustaining that action. So just to say a few things about the kinds of projects that have come out of it, there's been a really successful group in Todmorden called Keep Tod Tidy, which started off with a few people litter picking, but is now really a large group of people who now run their own litter picks as well. It sort of helped build the capacity of Sisters United and Calder Community Cares. There's an orchard group in Todmorden where people started repairing, looking after the trees that had become diseased, and started to plant new orchards. And then there's also been the EMT Foundation, which has been working on sort of promoting African heritage and understanding of African cultures in schools and in the local community as well. So I hope that's just given you a bit of an idea about some of the work that we're doing and what's come out of the Active Citizens work that we've been doing.
Great, thank you. So we had three different inputs, and Kirsten gave us a question which was, how much do we actually want people in the community to be involved in deliberation and decision making? So that's a question that's posed to us all. Catherine quite clearly said the voluntary community sector can help, we just need to know. So there was something about communication there. And there we just got some really solid examples of what active citizenship can mean, but the kind of capacity building and input that might be needed in order to enable actions to become sustainable. So I am going to hand over to you. I was just looking in the chat, there's nothing yet. Any comments? Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thanks. It was really interesting, and congratulations on your appointment, Catherine. I think I would like to. I think the voluntary and community sector, sort of the infrastructure support, has been a bit confused. I mean, from my point of view, I found it quite confusing with the different branches, and then the council's got the volunteer sort of section as well. And I'm not always clear how it all fits together. And I know the VSI Alliance is the sort of network organisation, but I'm not entirely sure how that fits with VAC. And I suppose these things are a little bit confusing. And I think it's really important to have some sort of independent voluntary sector sort of forum where voluntary organisations can sort of come together and have a bit of voice, and they can push back at the council and say, you know, and feel that they've got a bit of power to advocate for their members.
Thank you. Catherine, I'll let you come back to that at the end, that specific point around maybe there's a lack of understanding around the infrastructure organisations and their specific role, but I'll let you come back to that at the end. Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. It was what Kirsten said about involving the local community in the structure of the town and stuff. We have our ward forums once every 3 months. The problem is it's the same 12 people that turn up every time. So are they really a cross section of our community? They seem to be sort of quite forceful, assertive people who put forward their views and call for A, B and C, but I'm not sure if they're actually a true reflection of our community. Just throw that in the hat.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Young. Kirsten, I'll let you come back to that at the end. Councillor Robinson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Totally take Councillor Smith's point about power for the communities, totally get that. The other point I'd reference is case studies. What can you actually achieve as a community? I think that's probably pretty key. The other interesting thing is, I think we as a council need to appreciate that the council's involvement is at its peak at the start, and then the council's involvement will diminish over time in its relationship in community groups. I think that's quite an important one. Going on to this communication element, I know I'm banging on about it, but in some ways it'd be interesting if dedicated towards neighbourhoods could be a specific communications officer. And by that, if that communications officer had a database to sign up, so therefore if there is something going on, they can literally email blast those communities. That's what we need to start looking at. How do we actually get in touch with our network, which is the community, and keep in touch with them? There's some real work to be done there, but I think a communications officer dedicated to this stuff could be quite beneficial.
Thank you. Are there any other comments before I go back to see if there's reflections from the speakers? Okay, I'll go to Catherine first of all.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Yeah, the VSI Alliance is a collection of commissioners and providers who we work in partnership. It's not an entity in itself, so it's an umbrella name, so that regardless if those commissioners and providers change, that name will continue over time. it is unique in the country in the way it works, and it delivers some amazing things. The relationships and the connectivity that's starting to come out of the fact that different providers of different elements of support for the voluntary sector are working together. So VAC sits within that. We exist in our own right and deliver work independently of that, but it's all connected to the Voluntary Sector Infrastructure Alliance. It's there to provide that infrastructure support. But completely take your point that there's probably some work to be done on communicating that out. Not to steal Councillor Robinson's word about communication, but I think it is going back to how that's embedded. It's very new. It's in its first iteration, so we're hopeful that we'll learn some lessons from that and move that forward. About that, I'd also like to just quickly, if I may, Councillor Kavanagh, just talk about the engagement champions and why I think that's really successful. Picking up on Councillor Robinson's point just there about communication and how to reach communities, and I think that. I completely agree, having dedicated support and expertise in communications as a discipline is really, really important. I also think it's really important to recognise that people hear information in very, very different ways. And so some things coming from the council, and if I get a letter from the council, I'm the kind of person who goes, okay, well, I will read this and I will digest it and I will do something about it. But that's not everybody's approach. And there are many people who, if they receive information from an authority, their reaction can be actually really quite negative. And so the work of the engagement champions is demonstrating how different approaches in different communities at different times can deliver different voices, kind of going back to what Councillor Young said about are people representative through certain channels, if it's the same 12 people turning up, and trying really different approaches that we might find weird and wonderful, is actually a really good way to ensure that you have that diversity of opinion and voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Councillor Courtney.
Just a very quick one, and I'm sorry about the background noise. My son's watching Sherlock in the background. So just a quick question really for Hilary. Just some how. So how much time and resources does the programme need or take?
Well, I mean, we've run the programme. The grant from the British Council is in total, I think it's usually around £12,000. So that pays for the workshop programme and for people to sort of come on that. So that's 24 hours of training over a series of weeks. And obviously all the kind of recruitment that brings people into the room, and that's a really big part of the work actually, is in terms of engaging with people in lots of different communities to try and make sure that we have a diverse group of people that will make the learning really rich, and ensure that we've got people from lots of different areas. We predominantly focus on disadvantaged areas, but yeah, so that people have the opportunity to go on the programme. And then there's some support afterwards for people who are running social action projects. So yeah, there's a bit of kind of mentoring associated with it as well.
Great, thank you. Nobody has taken the challenge that Kirsten put out there. Nobody has directly answered the question, how much power do we want to give to communities to deliberate and decision making? I don't know, never known councillors to be this timid. But as you're all being so timid, I'm going to hand over to Mike, who I think is going to make a comment on that.
So thank you, Chair. I was actually going to be very cheeky and try and impersonate Councillor Caffrey, who was heavily involved in the planning of this session, and I think really regretted that he wasn't able to be here. But in the terms, the objectives of the work, there's a direct quote from Councillor Caffrey, which was to consider how the public can take more controls for parks and ground management and be allowed more responsibility with sweeping reductions in council red tape to facilitate this involvement. And I think I'm sort of Councillor Caffrey would be disappointed if his views weren't reflected, I think. And it's almost back to Kirsten's challenge in a way, in that I think his view is that we as an authority can sometimes make things difficult in fairly simple situations, and so he would put that challenge back to us, back to the officer corps, probably in particular, to say, do we necessarily have enough of an appetite for the risk of allowing things to to be controlled elsewhere. His phrase was the red tape one, not mine, but I think he would like to see that reflected in the discussion. Thank you, Chair.
Great. So would any officer like to comment on that, or Councillor Lynn? I don't know if you wanted to. Yep, go for it.
Yes. No, I'm quite sure, Councillor. I can imagine Councillor Caffrey saying that, and you did a very good impersonation there, Mike. Yeah, well, a couple of things really. First of all, I think that one of the things that Amy Powell-Bevan, who's done such a fantastic job of working with volunteers who are getting involved in litter picks and all sorts of things, would say, and I think Andrew would also say that, Andrew Pitts would also say that, is that sometimes people don't necessarily want to be involved as a fully formed community group. Sometimes they're just a bunch of people, or as a fully formed community group that's going to kind of take action about litter picking or whatever every month or what have you. They might just want to do a one-off thing with lots of the kids at the beginning of the summer holidays or whatever it is. So I think that, and I think very much that the work that we're going to try and do in public services and communities is to try and be quite flexible, actually, and to recognise that we want to work. Anybody that wants to help us make Calderdale a better place and somewhere that people that neighbourhoods that people can be proud of, then we will find a way to work with you. And I think that's very much the message that Amy would want me to put across to you. Having said that, it's also important to recognise that the average citizen of Calderdale would be the first to complain if we started allowing people on a voluntary basis to do things that might be harmful to them or might put them at risk or whatever, quite apart from the fact that if something terrible happens, then they'll sue the council. So some of what people talk about as being red tape is also can sometimes actually also be about your safety. But I think I can honestly say, I've been involved, as probably most councillors here have been involved in, for example, litter picks and clean-up campaigns and things like that, that actually I think our officers try to be as flexible as they possibly can about that. And that flexibility includes, as I say, trying to fit in with when people can actually get together and do things. And also the extent to which they want to turn into a fully fledged community group, or whether they're just a bunch of friends who want to get in touch with us and say, will you help us and come and collect all the rubbish that we collect and give us the plastic bags that are properly labelled and everything so that we can do it. So that we're trying to simplify it as much as we can. So Councillor Caffrey, needn't worry, we've sort of got that message loud and clear, and I hope we're going to run with it. Hope that helps. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to go to Debs first, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Bellinger.
Oh, thanks. It was just to say what's possible, really, and I think Sarah's not here, is she? And Sarah's been instrumental in leading and supporting all the work that the voluntary sector's been doing around COVID. And actually, all those mutual aid groups I mentioned before, they're not constituted community groups. The groups of people that spontaneously got together and said we want to support people. It just shows what's possible, and actually we've proved it now, haven't we? And we've managed to do that with safeguards in place as well. And Sarah has done a lot of work to make sure that people are safeguarded and protected in that, but equally that it's quite an enabling approach.
Great, thanks, Deb. So Debs has just taken us up. Paul, are you going to continue with that positive vibe?
I'll try and keep it as positive as I can. One of the things you'll be pleased to know, and Councillor Dickinson and Andrew Pitts and Steve, we've already had a bit of a review group going with regards improving spaces and cleaner streets and involving the community and Council Lynn as well. And one of the things that was raised from that is, as an authority, we needed to put something in place to explain to members of the public what we would expect or what they can and can't do, basically. So members of the public can't say, right, we want to take over this area, this is what we want to do to the place, and they get carte blanche, basically. That's not the case. We needed to ensure that there were sort of like guidelines in place, and again down to the safety aspects as well of group members of the public taking on places. I think one of the things as well, as I just want to touch on, is getting people out there, and Deborah mentioned it before, to enjoy our open spaces and be more healthy and help with mindfulness and getting involved in things. But I think we've got to lead by a little bit of example as well as an authority. And some of our parks and green spaces are in quite a poor condition at the moment, and that's something that's brought back to me from members of our community. And I think at the end of the day, if we want to get our people into parks again, we've got to make sure that they're inviting to start with. We don't want to be saying, "Oh, come along to the park, come and have a bit of a litter pick," and they get there and it's a jungle. We want to make sure that we're on top of our game first and make sure these places are nice and clean and inviting and safe for these people to continue and keep it maintained afterwards. So I think there's a few things there that we sort of like need to look at first. But yeah, thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you. So we've had quite a long discussion, and I think we're going, I think, as if we're going to finish at 8, which is really good. But we just think back to the beginning. So obviously Andrew Pitts framed that we wanted to talk about how we changed the relationship between the council and our residents. We had really good information about asset transfers. We looked at opportunities of working with town and parish councils. We then had really great examples of how public health has worked with the community. Some other great examples around how we listen to our communities in the neighbourhoods team, and then how the voluntary community sector is playing a role. So we've got 10 minutes. Are there any final reflections? There could be recommendations. I don't mean recommendations that we're going to vote on. I just mean lessons learned from everything that you've heard today that we want to take forward, or any issues that you think, actually, I think we need a longer amount of time to look at that specific issue. Don't all jump at once.
Sorry, I haven't put it in there. Can I say something? Yeah, I really, someone earlier sort of talked about sort of like being really clear about what the council's offering and then what could be offered on top of that, and I think sort of like also really clear outlines of what different, some really good examples of what communities can do. So I think some practical examples, of things that people can do to take pride in their areas, and some of the benefits of that. I think that sort of thing would be really positive. I was having a discussion with someone, I can't remember who it was, but we were sort of talking about just sort of the labeling really clearly about how to do sort of particular things, like in like GPs and stuff. They have sort of a really good system of how to who to contact, or who to what services to engage with if you're not feeling very well. And I think some sort of like real signposting about engaging with the council as well, to make sure that sort of engagement with the right services sort of like happens. So I think it's all about comms as well, isn't it? So I think encouraging people, so there's comms and encouraging people that how helping spread that word of the different things that different areas do. I don't know. Yeah,
thank you. That was a really concrete suggestion, so thanks for that, Councillor Courtney. Are there any more thoughts? I know probably people are thinking, I'd like my tea right now, but this is
Chair,
yes. Yes, Councillor Robinson.
Few quick things from me. You might have seen the fly tipping system that the council have, where you report fly tipping online, you can do your waste collections online, and then you get communication from the council. Could that work with this community model? Possibly so. I think it's clear that the communication with the resident, whether it's via text, whether it's via my preferred technique, which would be an app personally, is that the future to this? I don't know, possibly. Another point is bridging the gap between the professional standard of the council and also the volunteer standard as well. I think that's a key point. It'd be interesting. an interesting activity coming from this would be to map out everything that the council does. I know it's huge, but map it all out and then figure out what volunteers could do within those areas. I think that would be a really interesting activity there. Possibly something that we could do as a scrutiny board, you never know. And then just final thing is to realise the importance of the socialisation element as well, and getting people engaged with each other. I think that's really one of the key reasons why people do this, to meet your neighbours. So that's an important thing to outline as well.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Some of the good suggestions. So, Councillor Smith.
Yeah, just I think the ward forum thing, I think that needs to be relooked at. I think we do need to broaden it out and look at how we get more people engaged. But also, if we want to do a litter pick, I mean, in the past, I have just done organised litter picks, and we just phone up and somebody will come along with some bags and say leave them there, and it's been absolutely fine. It couldn't have been easier. So now what happens if you want to get Amy to sort of, you know, help coordinate something? How do you get in touch with Amy? Because I find the council website an absolute monster, and I can never find anybody who I want to get in touch with on it. So how simple is that actual first point of contact? If somebody thinks, I'd really like to do a litter pick, how easy is it for them to pick up the phone and find that first person? Because I think that's really important. And also, just to say, the ward forum grants are amazing. 500 quid, you don't need to be constituted. You can put on a little fun day, you can put on a street party. You know, there's such a good idea for bringing people together, and you know, I think that they should be promoted, and we should be promoting good, you know, good examples of that.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Smith. I've got Councillor Bellinger and Kirsten, but I think, Kirsten, are you going to comment on whether groups need to be constituted or not?
I am. Well spotted.
I think they do need to be constituted.
They do need to be constituted. Yes. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Kirsten, do you want to reflect on anything else? Because I'm wary that I didn't come back to you, and that actually nobody answered your question. Is there anything you would like to say before the?
I think just in terms of ward forums, so the reflections that we've heard are things that we're really familiar with. Ward forum attendance is patchy across the board. Some areas have high, some areas have low. There is a consistent trend of a few numbers of people who regularly come, and it's not representative of the community as a whole. So it is right with the massive change in behaviour, lots of people much more familiar with being online. There's a bit of an indication through our online ward forums that numbers attending are lower, but that it's new people, whereas people who used to go to the public meetings are not attending online. So there's definitely capacity to think about how do we do it differently, how do we engage differently through our ward forums. But also it's back to that question I asked before, which was, what is the purpose of the ward forum? Part of it's about saying, I'm upset about something that's happening, what are you going to do about it? But is there not also scope there to say, we want you to be able to make decisions about how things are done in your area and to have some real power to influence that? So that was my comment. Yeah.
Thank you, Kirsten. Councillor Bellinger, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Beach.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick point, actually, that we need to start looking at how we can accommodate people more as well, because what we'll find is that during the summer months, it's fine for people to do things during the week because of the late nights, the lighter nights. But when it gets to sort of like this time of year, a lot of people tend to do things around the weekends. That's when they want to get involved in making a difference. And at the weekends, we don't always have a lot of staff working. So I think we've got to look at ways in which we can actually accommodate those groups of people on a weekend as well.
Great, thank you. Councillor Beach.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to pick up on the aspect of digital or physical ward forums. And I think the physical ward forums have an additional item, which you could call it contact your councillors. There's nothing quite like being in the same room as your councillors. This whole digital thing, I think residents find a bit distant and a bit bland. That's all I've got to say.
Great, thank you, Councillor Beach. So we're at the end of the meeting now. I just want to say a massive thank you, particularly to the officers and other people that have come to input. Thank you for giving your time. In terms of the members of Place Scrutiny Board, the normal members, we originally were going to have the work programme on this agenda, but there wasn't time. So if people have time to look at the work programme, and if you have any suggestions or there's anything you want to talk about, please send an email to Fazana about the work programme, because there was no way we could cover it this evening. So unless, Mike, you have anything to add, I think we'll close the meeting.
I was just going to say, Chair, that Fazana and myself will put together a brief report of the discussion this evening and the points that were raised, and then we'll talk to Councillor Caffrey and Councillor Kavanagh about how we can take that forward with you as a whole board in terms of concluding any conclusions or recommendations you may want to make.
Great, thank you very much. Councillor Lynn. Oh, you're just waving, sorry. Were you waving or did you want to speak?
No, I was just waving goodbye.
Just waving.
But also, having said that, I'd like to just say, Councillor Kavanagh, what a brilliant job I think you've done chairing it. So that was all.
Thank you, that's very kind. Thanks everyone.